Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, where we'll take a look at the perspectives of youth on social emotional learning. Before we begin the program, I'll review just a few quick housekeeping items. We will be accepting questions throughout the webinar, and we'll hold a Q&A session at the end of the presentation once all of our speakers have finished. To send a question, you'll use the questions feature that's on your toolbar. Just type your question into the top box, push send, and I'll put your question into the queue to be answered at the end of the webinar. Since we have several presenters today, when you send in a question, if you could please indicate who you're asking the question of so that we're sure to direct it to the correct person. If it's a question for anyone or everyone, that's fine too, but if there is someone specifically you'd like to have answer the question, just let us know that when you type that question to me. If you experience any technical difficulties during the webinar, please use that same question feature to get my attention, and I'll do my best to resolve the problem for you. We will be sharing a recording of the webinar as well as the presentation slides with you, so keep an eye on your email inbox tomorrow for details on how to access those materials. I am pleased to introduce today's speakers. First, we'll be joined by Laura Frevaletti, who is Senior Program Officer for the Allstate Foundation that is supported by Allstate Insurance Company. The report, Perspectives from Students on High School and Social Emotional Learning, was made possible by the Allstate Foundation. Melissa Schlinger, who is Vice President of Practice and Programs with Castle, will provide us with some background information and context about social emotional learning. And she'll be followed by Cori Hunt and Jennifer DePauli, who will share the findings of the research conducted with 1,300 high school students and recent graduates that was published in the respected report. Cori Hunt is Senior Vice President with Heart Research, and Jennifer is now Senior Researcher with the Learning Policy Institute. Finally, we'll hear from Michelle Hammond about how youth voice is being given a priority in Washoe County School District in Nevada. Michelle is the Student Voice Coordinator for the district. So we've got a lot to cover today with our speakers, so I'm going to go ahead and turn the program over to Laura now.
Thank you, and hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm so excited to be on this call because I am just passionate about not just our youth, but social emotional learning and the future. But beyond me, there's Allstate and the Allstate Foundation. And I'd like to tell you just a little bit about how we think about young people and social emotional learning. And you can see it in this slide, and I will read this to you. Imagine a future defined by a culture of service, led by our youngest citizens. And we like to think that it's powered by the Allstate Foundation. We call our program Good Starts Young. That's a little inspiration to start our discussion today. If you could go to the next slide. So I'm going to spend just a minute before we dive into this interesting research and tell you about the Allstate Foundation. We've really been focusing on youth since 2005, when we learned that teen deaths were reaching epidemic levels. At that point, as both an insurance company and a company that cared about its communities and future citizens, we developed an education, advocate, legislation, and awareness campaign. And we certainly don't and can't take sole credit, but 10 years later, teen deaths by driving accidents had dropped by 50%. At that point, we turned our attention to what could we do next for youth. And we did quite a bit of research to understand what is key to youth's current and future success. And what we learned is that social and emotional learning is as, if not more important than academic achievement alone. So a few years ago, we embarked in the path to understand more about social emotional learning and how we could help young people develop those critical skills. If you could turn the slide. I'm very pleased to share that we recently, this October, announced a $45 million investment in programs that would help young people throughout the United States develop those skills. Through additional research, we learned that really the tipping point to ensure that young people and schools and communities are supporting with youth with these schools is 14 million youth across the United States, which is about 25% of youth in elementary and high schools. And we set a goal that really isn't that far away by 2022 to see this goal achieved. So we announced that this October. We sponsored the research that we're about to hear about. And I'd like to play just a short video of some of the reactions and comments about social emotional learning. We heard from people on the mall, that's the mall in Washington, D.C., when we launched this awareness campaign on social emotional learning.
Great, and it'll be just a little blip, so everybody just hold on while we get to the video.
I think academics alone is not enough.
I think that social and emotional learning skills are critical, especially now.
It's so critical at this point in time that they focus not just on history, math, but they focus on how to treat each other.
When I grow up, I want to be a teacher and a photographer.
Human rights lawyer.
President of the United States.
As I stepped on the pedestal, I felt a lot of empowerment.
I want to be a leader because I got to help people, make the world a better place.
Good does start young. If it doesn't start young, when does it start?
I know we'll flip to the next slide. I want to talk just a minute about how important it is to work with partners who have an authentic reputation and reach with young people. We certainly couldn't do it, and we work through our partners across the United States. An example of a key partner is We Charity, who has free programs throughout the country with a real focus on service learning, which we know and only enhances the development of social emotional learning skills. To name some of our other partners, certainly CASEL, the Collaborative for Academic Social Emotional Learning, is a newer partner and one that we so very much value. Facing History in Ourselves, there is a website for teachers and for parents called We Are Teachers that helps us spread news about the programs that are available, and nearly all of those are free. So I can't say enough if there are nonprofit organizations on the phone today that we value the work that you do in your communities so very, very much, and know that we couldn't do it without you. So if we flip to the next slide, one of the things.
I'm
yes?
sorry, I'm having a little bit of trouble getting my computer to sync with what everyone else is seeing. So I think we're now slide though, so I apologize for that.
That's all right.
So sorry, continue.
Yep, I'll continue, and I'm just about done because we want to get to the research. I just want to say two more things. First is from a youth perspective and thinking about youth, we really want to see youth become engaged citizens. We want to inspire optimism about youth. We know that sometimes isn't the case where you think about what they will do in the future because the current situation is so daunting. But inspiring optimism is so important for young people. We also want young people to see themselves as problem solvers. So often we see the opposite portrayed in the news. And we know from our own schools and community organizations that young people are doing just tremendous work and are so thoughtful and so committed to helping others in their community. And finally, from an All-State Foundation perspective, we really want to put everyone on the path to having a prosperous community, healthy, engaged citizens. And the last point I'll make is that as an employer, we know that social emotional learning skills are so important. We look for those skills within our current employee base, as well as those that we want to hire, both young, fresh out of school, Gen Z and millennials, and those with more experience. And research from the World Economic Forum showed that 6 of the top 10 skills identified there involve social emotional learning competence. So those are things like people management, coordinating with others, emotional intelligence, judgment and decision making, service orientation, and negotiation. So clearly these skills are so very important, and we are very concerned and very committed to ensuring that our young people are able to develop those skills. And with that, it's perfect time to transition into what young people are saying about the opportunity to develop those skills. So it's my pleasure to turn the podium, if you will, back to Melissa.
Thanks, Laura. Hello, everyone. I'm Melissa Schlinger from CASEL. For those of you that don't know CASEL, we're the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. And our mission is really to try to help educators, try to help make SEL part of American education for all students, pre-K through 12. We do that by focusing on 3 main areas. There's a group of us over here focused on the science of SEL and our research team. We also have a number of us that are focused on policy work at the state and federal level. And then also our practice team here at CASEL is really focused on what's happening inside the classrooms, schools, and districts in the country. What I'd like to do is just quickly put us all on the same page with how we talk about SEL, and then we'll get right into the report. When CASEL defines social and emotional learning, many of you may be familiar with the wheel. The way that we define SEL is that it's actually a process. It's not simply a set of skills, but actually a process through which children and adults too acquire and effectively apply the knowledge, attitudes, and skills that they need to manage their emotions, to set and achieve goals, to feel and show empathy, to maintain good relationships, and to make good decisions. Many of you are familiar with this wheel you see here on the right that breaks those competencies into self-awareness and self-management, which is really how do I know and understand myself, and what is my behavior, and how do I manage impulses, how do I stay motivated, how do I persevere, all those areas of self. And then in green, we see those competencies around the social competence. So how do I understand others? Can I show empathy? Can I understand the perspective of others? And can I engage in healthy relationships? And then, of course, how do I make responsible decisions with all that information in mind? These rings around the competencies are there to acknowledge that SEL is not something that we think is happening just in one place, but is actually happening in the classroom, throughout the school building, in home, and as we engage with our community. So we'll talk a little bit more about what school-wide SEL looks like after we get to the report. On the next slide, you can see that there's quite a bit of research that demonstrates the positive outcomes associated with social and emotional learning. If you go to CASEL's website, you can see lots of detailed information on the research. Today, I'm just going to talk about a couple of high-level points. This first top half of this slide talks about the 2011 meta-analysis, which really summarized the findings from over 200 studies involving hundreds of thousands of students that showed that when there is social and emotional programming in schools, we see improvements in not only social and emotional competence, but also improved attitudes about self, others, and school, more pro-social behavior, better classroom behavior, and improvements in academic performance as well. We also see fewer conduct problems, less emotional distress, and lower drug use. And those kinds of gains were shown not only in the short term, but in the long term. And we also know that the gains are not just for students, that adults who have social and emotional competence are more likely to stay in their classroom for longer. They're better able to manage their own relationships, their own challenging situations. and the kinds of things that can lead to burnout. We also know that there's a long-term effect on our young people when they have social emotional competence on their likelihood of healthy adult outcomes. So SEL is something that's important for not just our youth, but for all of us. Moving to the next slide. In addition to these kinds of research studies, CASEL has also over the years been learning from different folks in the community about their beliefs about SEL and its importance. A couple of years ago, we heard from principals loud and clear that 95% of them felt committed to developing social and emotional skills in schools. We've also heard from our teachers that they also believe this is super important and believe that we should have a greater focus on SEL in schools. The business community has been surveyed and been very clear that these are the kinds of competencies that they'd like to see the future workforce have. They want to have employees who can collaborate effectively, manage conflict, manage stress, persevere, problem solve. So we've heard loud from those sectors, and parents themselves have also said that they believe that this is more important to them. Over more than half the parents said it's more important that their kids have these kinds of competence than academic performance skills. And one thing that we decided was missing from all of these surveys was, what about the youth themselves? And what would they say about how important this is to them, not only while they're in school, but once they leave school and reflect back, how important is it to the youth that social and emotional learning is part of their academic and educational experience? And so that's really what we're going to be talking about today. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Cori, who's going to talk to us a little bit about this new report, Respected, which is the perspectives of youth on high school and social and emotional learning.
Great, thanks so much. If you could turn to the next slide with the overview. Great. So thank you all for joining us. It was really a privilege to partner with CASEL and Civic and the All-State Foundation on this really important project. I'll just briefly review the methodology, and then Jen will walk you through the research findings. But we started with qualitative research. And the purpose of that is really to listen to students and young adults talk about their experiences in school in their own words, listen to them describe their environment, including what helps them learn, what makes it harder for them to learn. And also an important part of the qualitative research was to test and refine language describing social and emotional skills and SEL for the survey, so that we could make sure that youth and young adults understood the questions that we were asking in the survey. So we completed a total in the qualitative research of 48 interviews. All of the qualitative interviews were conducted one-on-one, so the students would feel more comfortable expressing themselves, most of them by phone, but the middle school students we did in person. 31 of the students, or 31 of the interviews were with youth and young adults in non-SEL schools, and we started with those first. Those included 11 middle school students, 10 high school students, and 10 recent high school students. In all of the research, we wanted to make sure we heard from students with different backgrounds and experiences. So in the qualitative, we made sure to have an even mix of boys and girls, a good mix of geographic area that they came from across the country, and very racially diverse as well. And then in phase 2, we conducted 17 total interviews with students in high schools that have implemented SEL. We worked with CASEL as well as directors of research and evaluation to ensure we were recruiting students from schools with known and established SEL programs. So for example, 5 interviews we conducted with students from Washoe County School District. 6 were from Chicago schools that had either exemplary or established SEL designations, 5 from Cleveland, and 2 from 9th graders in DePage, where all 9th graders in DePage take SEL classes. And then we followed the qualitative with the quantitative survey of 1,300 youth and young adults, and the goal here is really to have quantifiable measures of students' experiences, how they rate their schools, including how good of a job their schools are doing helping students develop these social and emotional skills. The survey included 800 high school students ages 14 to 19 and 500 young adults post-high school ages 16 to 22. We call them post-high school. Most of them graduated high school, but some of them left without completing a degree. And then we took careful attention in the construction of the sample to ensure that it is representative of students and young adults nationwide. It's consistent with census figures geographically and demographically, and it's also consistent with measures from the National Center for Education Statistics for school characteristics. So in terms of racial and ethnic diversity, the sample is representative of high school students and young adults nationwide, with 21% identifying as Hispanic or Latino, 15% Black or African American, and 57% white. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jen, who will walk you through the research findings.
Great, thanks, Cori. So I also want to say too, before I begin, that this is a pretty high level overview of what's in the report. There's a lot of really, really great data, and we just don't have enough time to go over all of it. And I especially want to point out, as Cori just said, they conducted interviews with students in SEL schools and non-SEL schools, which is something that I won't necessarily talk about today. Report their quotes and their 3 case studies of students who are in SEL schools and how that experience has affected their high school experience. And I really recommend going to the report and looking at those items, because, like I said, I won't have time to talk about them today. So getting into the report, as Melissa said, we've heard from teachers and administrators on the importance of SEL in schools in the past, but we wanted to go straight to the heart of the school, the students. And so, we started off looking at these 3 research questions, and these really help us to see what the big themes are that came out of this report. So our 3 research questions were: how do current feel about their high school experience? How do current and recent high school students perceive the state of social and emotional learning in their high schools? And how do current and recent high school students perceive the benefits of SEL? And you can go ahead to the next slide. So starting with that first question, in regard to how both current and recent high school students feel about their high school experience, most gave their high schools an A or a B as a place to learn, and they feel as though their teachers and administrators are supportive of students. However, as this slide shows, many see deficits in how well their school does at preparing students for success after high school. This is especially true for recent high grads, fewer than half of whom say their high school did a good job of preparing them for success after high school, and more specifically, preparing them for a job or career after high school. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Additionally, significant numbers of current and recent high school students say that experiencing certain social and emotional problems, including feeling stressed, dealing with disruptive students, external life and outside of school, a lack of confidence, bullying or being picked on, and feeling lonely interfere with their ability to learn in school. Next slide, please. And so looking at this from the perspective of young adults, those who are out of high school, you can see that these students or these young adults are especially likely to see the harmful effects. So they actually report these things made it much to learn than students who are currently in high school. So social and emotional problems are clearly impacting students and much able to achieve in school. To the next slide. And I will just say really quickly before we move on to the second theme, in that first theme, I'm not sure if somebody needs to put their phone on, because I'm hearing background noise. So if somebody can just check and make sure that they have their phones muted, that might help us all hear a little bit better.
We're also having you cut out.
Moving
on, Jen, we're actually having you cut out a little bit. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure what to do about that if you're on a headset or on your phone, but it is cutting out now and again.
Okay, well, I'll try to keep talking, and then maybe in the meantime, I'll try to also call in separately to see if that helps.
Okay.
you can go ahead and well, so going with the second part of this presentation, or this report, social issues playing a key role in the ability of young people to learn in high school. We next look at the state of social emotional learning in high school. I don't think I actually have a phone number to call in, so I'll just hope that this gets a little bit better. Apologize for anybody who's having a hard time hearing. So Melissa spoke earlier about the CAS wheel you can see in the corner there that gives us the framework for social emotional learning. So to understand how well high schools are doing at helping students learn social and emotional skills, we presented this description to young people based on the framework. So the description, you can basically read it here. These schools offer courses that students expect to take, such as math, science, and English, but the schools also put a priority on helping students learn social and emotional skills. So the 7 big skills that we looked at were having confidence in themselves, getting along with and working with people who are different from them, knowing how to learning how to deal with difficult situations in life, and understanding other people's feelings and points of view. Ahead and switch slides. So one of the really great findings in young adults like the idea of attending a school that helps students develop those skills. Majorities believe they would personally benefit from attending those schools. So as you can see, 76% of current high school students said that it has a lot of appeal. 75% of post-high school young adults say that that school would be appealing. And then 74% of current high school students and 74% of post-high school young adults say that attending a school like that emphasizes learning those skills would have helped them personally. You can go to the next slide. The only problem is that what we found is that fewer than half of young adults believe their school did a good job helping students. Current students have a more generous view, but few say their school is doing a really great job at helping them develop these skills. And there's a lot of information on this slide. It's in the report, so feel free to go visit it here. And I know that this is going to be shared after, so I won't go into all of these numbers. But some of these skills are obviously getting across to some students, but really we need to focus a lot more to make sure that students have the opportunity to develop these skills. You can move to the next slide. And then the big overarching finding about the state of SEL in schools is that very few schools are really doing a great job of helping students on these skills. So in total, 36% of current high school students and 23% of recent high school students rate their high schools as doing a pretty great or good job of helping them develop at least 6 or 7 of those skills, or what we would consider to be a strong SEL skill or school. On the other hand, 24% of current high school students and 36% of recent high school students reported their school as being a weak SEL school. And then in the middle, about 4 in 10 students say that they're attending a medium SEL school. But really, if you look at that little tiny italic writing, you can see just 4% of current high school students and 5% of recent high school students rated their high school as being great on helping them develop all 7 skills. And I'll go through this pretty quickly, but there's a lot of really great benefits. You can move forward. A lot of really, really great benefits that we saw that students who are in those schools that we would consider to be strong SEL schools are already seeing. So, the first one we'll see is that students who are in strong SEL schools report a more positive learning environment. So you can see 92% of current high school students in high SEL schools give their school an A or a B, compared to 55% in low SEL schools. And pretty similar between former students in high SEL schools versus low SEL schools. We'll move to the next slide. adults from strong SEL schools are more likely to feel that their voice matters. We thought this was really, really important. We conducted this survey in the wake of the Parkland shooting, where we saw a lot of really great youth voice coming to the forefront post that event. And which, you know, that trend, and what we want to see is that these students actually do feel that they have a voice, and students that are in schools where they feel like SEL is strong and the development of those skills are strong are far more likely to say that their voice matters. And I just want to point out that Michelle is going to be talking a little bit later about youth voice and how that's playing out in Washoe County. You can go to the next slide. Students and young adults from strong SEL schools also feel that their school did a better job helping them learn academic material. You know, we sometimes think that these things may be at odds, but really those things go hand in hand. 95% of current students and 93% of recent students say that their school did a really good job of helping them learn academic material, compared to 49% of current students and 37% of recent students in weak SEL schools. Move to the next slide. We also see that students' engagement in their own learning is higher in SEL schools. So those students in high SEL skills are more motivated, and they're more excited about what they're learning in schools by really wide margins, as you can see. And next slide. And this one we think is really, really important. You know, I mentioned the Parkland shooting and the raising of youth voice after that. But we also know that the conversation has become really intense around making sure that our schools are safe and what we can do to make students feel safer in their schools, not only, you know, emotionally and you know, amongst their peers, but physically safe in schools. So we asked the question about physical safety. And as young adults in strong SEL schools report feeling safer at higher rates than their peers in other schools, and by pretty wide margins. So we think that's a really important finding. Slide. And to wrap it up, you know, to bring it full circle, I said at the beginning, you know, students didn't necessarily feel as though their high schools were preparing them for life after high school. And as you can see here, when we looked at the young adults, those recent high schools, and how they felt, the students who were in schools where they said that we're focusing highly, helping them develop those SEL schools, those students feel much more prepared for success after high school, and they feel much better about the job that their school did preparing them for a job or career after high school. And with that, I will pass it back over to Melissa, and we'll be happy to answer any other questions about the report after.
Thanks, Jen. So I guess the question that we really want to also be able to answer is, what does it mean to create a school that is achieving school-wide SEL like the ones in the strong SEL schools in that report? And a lot of times people have come to the conclusion that SEL is really important, but then when it comes to what does that actually mean, what are we supposed to do, that remains a puzzle. What I wanted to do is just share with you a little bit of information about how CASEL defines school-wide SEL, and talk a little bit about how we've learned that information, and then also alert you to some resources that'll be coming down the pike, and then introduce one of our partner districts to talk more. Many of you may be familiar with CASEL's Collaborating Districts Initiative. We've been partnering with large urban school districts since 2011 and have over 20 large districts that are part of that community of partnership. With those districts, we have been working on supporting their systemic approach to SEL at both the district and school level, and learning about the best ways to do that, what kinds of things cause challenges, what are some strengths that can be leveraged, and looking at the kinds of outcomes that we get when we do that. So these partners have been our learning lab of how CASEL has gotten smarter about school and district-wide SEL. On the next slide, you can see that we've tried to translate this wheel that everyone has become familiar with into some specific pieces of what does that actually mean. Emily, if you just click, you'll see this list that's popping up here. These are the actual indicators of school-wide SEL. So the left model that we're all familiar with, those competencies and the rings, that translates to these, what we call 10 indicators of school-wide SEL. And this is much more helpful, I think, for some folks to really understand what does it take to achieve this. So you'll notice here that we're not only talking about explicit SEL instruction. And while that's super important, there's a number of other things that we think are critical to really create a school-wide approach, including integration with academics, as well as an opportunity to raise up the youth's voice, which we'll talk a little bit more about. Also, it's important to think about the environment in which students are learning. So both in the classroom and school, that we have a supportive climate. We know that we need to focus on the adult's own SEL competence. We know that we need discipline policies that are supportive and promote SEL competence as opposed to overly punitive or exclusionary policies. We know it's important to create a continuum of support so that you're not doing only something for the kids who are, really in crisis, but rather universal approaches, tier 2 approaches, and tier 3 approaches. We know engaging with families is super important, as well as engaging in an aligned way with our community partners, and that we're always reflecting on data for continuous improvement. These are the 10 indicators of school-wide SEL, and this list itself can be a little bit overwhelming. So one thing that we're really excited to announce, you can go to the next slide, is that in January, in just a few weeks, CASEL will be releasing a guide to school-wide SEL, which is a free online resource to help school teams lead the effort to achieve those 10 indicators. It goes through a 5-part process, and this is a long haul, not a sprint. It's more of a marathon. We go through a 5-part process to help schools achieve that deep level of implementation. If you go to the next slide and kind of click through with me, these are the 5 parts. Emily, as you click, you'll see things that pop up with each one. So building awareness, commitment, and ownership means that you're creating a vision and building some foundational knowledge. Then we help schools to provide a plan by having them engage with an SEL rubric and building off of that to develop goals and action planning. There's opportunities to focus on adult SEL. There's quite a bit to focus on, obviously, promoting SEL for students, and also opportunities for practicing continuous improvement. And here I want to just call out one thing in particular. While all of these things are part of creating school-wide SEL, since we are now engaging with our youth in this particular report, I want to highlight under the focus on SEL for students, the elevating of youth voice. We know that when you elevate youth voice, that you are in fact promoting all 5 competencies through those activities, that students develop a sense of their own self-awareness. They're having to do self-management, build relationships. There's a lot of agency that's built in and decision-making and healthy relationships, all that are part of youth voice. So we think this is a critical part of school-wide SEL. Our CDI partner districts have been elevating youth voice in a number of ways. A few things that they've been doing. They have student-led conferences with their teachers and parents. They have student-led instruction, student-led morning meeting. Many of them have student choice and how kids learn and what they're focused on. Our school districts often have done climate surveys and student surveys where they not only are asking students for their opinion, but they're sharing that data back to students so that they can be part of the problem solving around what to do with that data to improve. We see districts that are including student input on decisions about what assemblies to have, what field trips to go on, what kinds of instructional experiences they want to have, even what kind of hiring. If there's an opportunity to put students on hiring committees for principals and teachers to give them a voice in that, or on school boards or advisory councils to principals or even to superintendents. We're seeing that more and more in our CDI districts. We also see a lot of our districts that are engaging youth as part of the way they're handling discipline with peer mediation, leading restorative circles. And we also are having students do mentoring and buddy programs, and also having them come up with their own ideas of how they can become more engaged in their community, and then leading those efforts. Washoe County School District, which is in Reno, is one of our district partners, and I'm excited to turn it over to the team from Washoe County so you can learn more about their SEL implementation and specifically how they've been lifting up youth voice.
Thank you, Melissa. Hello, my name is Michelle Hammond. As Melissa said, I am the Student Voice Coordinator for our district. And I'm so honored to be here today and talk about just a couple of our many practices going on in Washoe County around youth voice. You can go ahead and, so we're missing a slide. So I wanted to first give a little bit of background information about our student voice efforts in our school district. So Castle, we've been working in partnership with Castle and under the direction of Trish Schaefer, SEL MTSS Director, since about 2012, implementing SEL in schools. We know that one of the biggest foundations we can set in order to build strong communities that foster student voice is our positive climate and culture. So in 2012, we definitely started laying a lot of groundwork for that. In 2014, we realized we had a lot of climate survey data, as Melissa said. We were doing a ton of stuff around asking our students for input via a survey, but it didn't seem like enough, and we really wanted to bring them back to the table to look at that data and again be part of the solutions and the action planning. So in 2014, one of our practices that we implemented was the Strength and Voices Conference. The conference in 2014 was pretty small. It started with 50 student attendees, grades 7 through 12. And basically the goal was just to bring them together and again, show them some of the data we were looking at and really talk about things that are important to them. So we are now in our 4th year. The 2019 conference will be our 5th annual. Last year in 2018, this event grew. We had about 430 attendees, 300 of which were students. We extended it all the way down to the elementary school level this year. And so we actually had 4th through 12th graders attending this event. And again, one of the biggest things about this event is just to make sure that we are looking at data with kids, getting their input, and then really modeling practices that all student participants can take back to their own schools around leadership work and making their schools better. One of the most exciting things about this conference is that it is all student inspired. And so students help us design the entire day from start to finish. And then the day of, students are facilitators. So we don't allow adults to come facilitate sessions alone on this day. What we do is actually start with ideas that are important to students. We reach out and work with students who want to present. Once they've chosen topics and identified some of their own ideas, we connect them with staff in our district who are experts, so to say, and can help them with some of that data and just adding a more rich conversation around it. But the students show up again to that day and they lead all of those sessions, many of which happen to be around SEL. We last year had a session on inclusion and just how to, as a student, what can you do to include all students and build that positive culture in your school. We had a session on managing stress. That continues to be a hot topic. And then, of course, always the students want a big session around school climate and safety. So that is always on the agenda as well. Go ahead and turn slides. So every year, we also solicit feedback after this conference and hear from the students who attended. And one of the things we continue to hear year after year is that they are so inspired during this day and just really feel like they can go back and make a difference in their school communities and be part of that positive climate and culture. But sometimes it's hard for them to take it back and actually make those actions happen. And so this past year, we worked with the students to really strengthen the action planning that occurred. And so at the end of this event, students had a good chunk of time to work in school teams where they kind of brought all of the stuff that they learned in their breakout sessions and they came back and made some action plans. The other important component was that we had asked that adults come to the table that day to work with the students and actually commit to taking that back and helping the students make that change in the schools. So that's been exciting. We've seen a lot of things happening at the school level as a result of last year's conference, and we're hoping to continue to expand upon that each year. Go ahead and turn slides. Another exciting thing, because again, we want to make sure this day is being brought back to the school level and increasing our school-wide SEL and student voice implementation. And so this year we actually added an evaluation at the end of the day to basically ask students how they want to be involved. And from this, we got about 90 students who really voiced some interest in serving on some kind of a leadership level, whether it's district-wide or school-wide. And so we've done a lot of follow-up around that, where we've fed these names of the students to school administrators when they're starting their own student advisory councils or looking for kids who maybe could lead some of these SEL movements in schools. We also are calling them student voice ambassadors, and so a bunch of them came back this year and they've been presenting at statewide and local conferences, as well as looking at the data with us. In one of the pictures you can see a proud group of students who actually attended a data summit and provided the student feedback and input while the adults were learning about the data that our school district had just released, which was super exciting. Moves, there you go. And so one of the biggest things we try to bring back to schools at this point, among many of our other efforts, we're really looking at student advisory councils and what this might look like at all levels, elementary, middle, and high school. And so we've really been trying to help schools around building those up, or looking at models that are currently existing and maybe tweaking them a little bit so that they're more focused on getting that youth voice and including youth in actionable items in order to make their schools a better place. Oftentimes, again, that goes right back to making schools, just increasing the positive climate and culture that we see. And then one of the things, again, one of the tools we've created, because we want to see schools really looking at all the climate survey data. We have 6 years now of climate survey data where we poll all of our kids about their SEL skills, what they feel really strong in, what they feel like they struggle in. We have a lot of questions around school safety. And so we're really wanting schools to be able to look at that data with students. So in 2014, there was a toolkit developed. And in that toolkit, there's a practice called ASK. And so basically this, in this practice, we go to schools and help them get these student groups together, basically look at climate survey data, pick out things that are important to them, listen to them about why that thing is important, why it stands out the most. Currently, I know a lot of bullying issues come up. And then we walk them through activities that basically tap into why this is happening in a way where it's not, we take the blame away, and it's more or less a conversation about who contributes, how does the larger school system contribute, what are students doing that might contribute, what are staff doing, and then it's all based on problem solving. And so taking each of those items that they come up with, how can we turn that around and improve and work together? And then again, the end of that is including all of the students in those action planning models. And so not just getting their input, but making sure that they are there from start to finish, all the way through to carrying out actions that they voice might be important. So in a nutshell, I know there's a lot going on, but I figured those were the 2 practices that we're doing that we could really share and that might be replicable. And we are always happy to answer questions. We're working on our website, so you can visit both our Washoe County School District SEL website and our Student Voice website. We continue to try to add resources, and we'll work on getting up examples of some of our student advisory councils at the school level, just so that people can have good models of what's going on out there.
Thank you, Michelle. Yes, I know we all wish we had more time to hear from you about what exactly is happening with your students, but that was a great little showcase of some of the things you're doing to really put that student voice front and center in our schools. And thank you also to everyone else who joined us and shared the findings of the research at that very high level, and Melissa for sharing some of the background about SEL. So we do have some time for some questions, and so we're going to go ahead and get to those. So the first is probably for Cori and Jen, and it's around the research methodology. In looking at the answers back from the students and the past students, were you able to tie back specific interventions and approaches that were used in those SEL schools that did seem to work with those students?
Cori, I don't know if you want to take this. This is Jen. I would say we didn't look at specific interventions. However, like I said, when you look at some of the case studies, the brief case studies that we have in the report, you can see some of the things that worked for those specific students. And I will just say that for us, I think what's always at the heart of it is strong relationships. So a lot of students talked about how not only did they feel like their teachers genuinely showed, a caring, they cared about them, that they genuinely were interested in helping them succeed relationships, but also having the ability to bring that relationship building to peer-to-peer relationships, and just really having that positive school climate where everybody is valued. But when we look at very specific interventions in terms of programming and things like that, that's not part of our study.
Right. Sorry, I had been on mute on accident, but yeah, we were looking at more of the social and emotional skills with students at a higher level in terms of conceptually what they were learning, what they thought they were doing better at, but not specific interventions.
Great, thanks. And just as a reminder to folks, we did provide a link to download that report, and we'll also include that in the follow-up email that goes tomorrow. So in case you didn't get a chance to look at it ahead of time, we will make sure you get the access to the full report in the email that goes tomorrow. So Michelle, we're getting a lot of questions about your process for selecting students for the advisory councils. And one person in particular said that her concern is that typically at her school, only leadership students seem to participate in activities. So how do you make sure you're broadening that reach?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's actually something we are really targeting as a goal in student advisory councils. And so I've seen a lot of different things. And one of the things is that we try to give schools autonomy. And as a coach, my job is to go in and help them start where they're at. And so it looks different in a lot of our schools. I think there's been a couple really successful models that I can highlight. One of which was in an elementary school. And so in this particular elementary school, the teachers had some lessons around SEL. And so the teachers actually did some front loading and had some discussion around SEL with the kids as far as like, what is it to be a leader, and who would you want kind of speaking up for you? And if you had someone talking on behalf of you, what would that look like? And so it was kind of this conversation around how maybe it's not our best friend that might be the best choice, but maybe that person who, can think on behalf of everybody. And so this particular school, and again, it's an elementary level, so it's pretty impressive, but these students nominated each other. The teachers still had ultimate discretion, but the goal was to try to get some of those aspiring leaders, is the word I keep trying to use. And so it was really cool. And then through that, of course, they do some SEL skill building. And so when you bring in those students, I think it's risky, but our messaging out there has been, it's through building the SEL skills that you build leaders. Another school actually a middle school, went to 3 of the feeder elementary schools in the spring and recruited from those schools for incoming middle schoolers, which was really cool. And again, they really highlighted how, if you want to be a leader, like, we can help you. And so they saw a lot of students. In fact, I had the honor of interviewing a 7th grader from that school who kind of talked about how she had never participated in leadership and extracurriculars, mostly because she just didn't see herself as a leader, and her home life, she had to be home babysitting, so she couldn't do things in the evening or after school. And so once they had come to her elementary school and said, we can actually do all of this stuff during school, it's going to be more focused on school improvement and making school a better place, she was just elated. And so she's now in her 2nd year in the Student Advisory Council at the middle school. So there's just a couple models, but I think having those conversations with students, oftentimes, I know for myself, building those groups, maybe we start with the natural leaders, and then I've had conversations with our students around who's missing. We've done some equity training. So we've had our equity department training our school district level student advisory council. And training the students to have an equity lens has been very helpful because they usually pick up on it pretty quick and can tell you who's missing and what voice we need to go collect.
Great, thank you. That was some great tips and a really wonderful firsthand story about involving someone who may not have otherwise been there to share her voice. Melissa, I'm not sure if you're able to answer this, but we're getting lots of acclaim for having done this study with high school students, and some questions wondering if there will be subsequent studies focused on middle school and even potentially elementary school students and their perceptions of SEL. You are muted. I'm unmuting you, Melissa.
Thank you. I think that's a great suggestion. And while we haven't done, a national survey of middle and elementary school students, I absolutely think that there are great opportunities to engage middle and elementary school students in hearing their voice. We don't currently have plans to do that on a national level, but as the examples I was giving earlier, and I think some of the ones that Michelle just shared, we're seeing students in elementary schools that are making meaningful contributions to school improvement decisions, whether it is what vendor are we using for the food in the cafeteria, to what can we do to build better community into our elementary school. So I definitely would not ever discount even those youngest kids. I've also seen great opportunities in pre-K and kindergarten classrooms to engage kids to lead activities, lead lessons, lead morning meeting, lead circle time, and really making sure that everybody has that experience and opportunity to be a leader. Really being a leader is about practicing what it feels like and what it is like to be a leader. So I'm glad to hear that there's a lot of enthusiasm, and I will certainly take that back to our team too.
Great, thank you. So Cori and Jen, this is back to you. Can you explain a little what the process was for selecting those SEL schools that were part of the survey?
In selecting the students who were in SEL for the qualitative, the in-depth interviews, which were conducted one-on-one. That's when we worked with Castle and Michelle on the call, actually, to help identify schools that we knew were implementing SEL programs. In the survey, this is really all about student voice. So we're in the survey asking students themselves to rate their schools on how good of a job their schools are doing, helping them develop social and emotional skills. So the survey results are really from the perspective of students. This is about what they think, not about what anyone else thinks. It's how good of a job they think their school is doing, helping them learn these skills.
Right, and again, we are sending out the copy of that report, and I know there's a lot more detail about the methodology and the specific questions and things like that included in that PDF of the report. We are running out of time, but Michelle, I'm going to ask you this one last question. Folks are wanting to know a little bit more detail about the Ask tool that you shared in the one slide.
Yes, so actually that tool is on our website currently. So if you go to the Washoe County School District main page and visit our Student Voice website, there is a link on the side for Student Voice resources and then educator resources. We've actually put our comprehensive toolkit on there. So that includes a detailed report of 3 different tools. But the Ask tool is one of those, and we've also created a very simplified infographic around how you can use that. So you're certainly welcome to go steal that and use it. And of course, I'm always happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Michelle. And I do just want to share with you and everyone else at Washoe, we're getting a lot of shout outs to all the great work that you're doing here on the back end chat. So congratulations to you and your students for participating in that way. So we have reached the end of our time. I know we could go on talking for quite a lot longer, but do keep an eye out tomorrow on your inbox for the link to the recording and to the slide deck, and again to the download of the report. And we hope that you will be able to join us for future CASEL webinars. We've got some coming up in the new year, so keep an eye out on the CASEL website as well as their newsletter for more information on those. And thank you again to everyone who joined us out in the audience and to our wonderful group of speakers. Thanks, everybody, and have a great afternoon.